She told me not to forget her, not because she was unforgettable, but because some people leave a kind of silence you can still hear years later. I didn't know it then, but she was right. I never did forget. The first time I saw her, the world seemed to slow down, not in that movie-like way people talk about, but in something quieter, more real. It was late afternoon at the coastal art retreat, the sky the color of soft linen and the air heavy with salt. I remember walking past the old veranda, carrying my sketch pad and half a cup of cold coffee, when I noticed her sitting alone near the edge of the cliffs. She wasn't posing like the others or trying to be seen. She was simply there, present, still, sketching something in a weathered leather notebook as if the entire sea existed just for her to understand. A breeze moved through her hair, streaked with silver strands that caught the fading light. There was a grace to her, not the kind that demands attention, but the kind that holds it without trying. I think what struck me most wasn't how she looked, but how she seemed untouched by the noise around her. People came and went, laughter echoed from the terrace, music played faintly from the dining hall, but she didn't move. Her calmness made the world around her feel too loud, too young, too restless. I don't know what made me approach her, but I did. I asked if I could sit nearby. She looked up then, dark eyes steady, curious but not surprised, and gave a small nod. Up close, she had that kind of beauty that time doesn't take away, only deepens. "What are you drawing?" I asked. "The sea," she said simply, her voice low and even. Then, after a pause, "But not how it looks. How it feels." I didn't understand at first, but I wanted to. So I sat there, listening to the waves and watching her hand move across the paper, slow, deliberate, sure. The longer I stayed, the less I wanted to leave. When the sun began to drop, painting gold across her cheekbones, she finally closed the notebook. "You're quiet," she said, glancing at me. "I was trying not to disturb you." Her lips curved slightly. "You didn't. Some people carry silence better than others." She stood, dusting sand from her skirt, and I realized I didn't even know her name. "Before I could ask," she said, "don't let the night fool you into thinking this place is peaceful. The sea remembers everything." Then she walked away, leaving me there with the sound of the tide and a feeling I couldn't quite name, something between admiration and ache. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about her. About her voice. About the way she looked at the ocean as though she could see herself in it. I didn't know who she was, or why her words stayed with me, but I knew one thing for certain: this wasn't just another passing encounter. It felt like the beginning of something I wasn't supposed to understand yet. The next few days blurred together in the soft rhythm of the retreat, the distant crash of waves, the smell of coffee in the mornings, the sound of sketch pencils against paper. I hadn't expected to see her again, but she was always there, somehow, sitting by the same cliffs, walking through the narrow garden paths, or leaning against the veranda rail with her notebook open. Her name was Elena. I learned it by accident when one of the instructors called out to her. The name fit her perfectly, elegant, simple, carrying a quiet strength. We started to talk more, though talk might be too strong a word for what we shared. Most of our time together was filled with silences that didn't need explaining. I'd sit beside her, watching the sea churn below us while she sketched in delicate lines. Sometimes she'd show me what she was working on, a blurred horizon, the suggestion of a figure standing alone on the shore. "You don't finish them," I said once, noticing how each sketch stopped just short of completion. She smiled faintly. "Not everything needs to be finished to be understood." That stayed with me. It felt like she was talking about more than drawings. There was something different about her presence. She didn't demand attention, yet every word she spoke made the air around her still. When she listened, she did it completely, her eyes steady, her expression soft, as if the world disappeared and only your voice existed. I had never met someone who made quiet feel like a form of trust. One afternoon, we walked along the beach together. The tide was pulling in, and the wind whipped at her scarf until it came loose and drifted toward the water. I caught it before it could fall, and for a moment our hands met. Her fingers were cool, soft, a little trembling from the breeze. "Careful," she murmured, looking at our joined hands, "that's how memories start." She didn't pull away right away. Neither did I. The contact was brief, but something inside me shifted, a warmth that was more than attraction, something deeper, older, like recognizing a melody I'd heard long ago. That night, I tried to draw her from memory, the lines of her profile, the way her hair caught the light, but I couldn't capture it. Everything I drew looked too alive, too vivid. She wasn't someone you could put on paper. She was the pause between brushstrokes, the stillness before color touched canvas. When we saw each other again the next morning, we didn't mention what happened. We just sat side by side, the sea murmuring below, and for the first time in a long time, I felt no need to fill the silence with words. It was enough just to be near her, to feel that calm between us. That quiet understanding that something unnamed was beginning to grow. It started with thunder rolling over the sea, low, distant, like a warning. By evening, the rain had turned relentless, a silver curtain against the windows. The retreat's power flickered twice, then vanished completely, leaving us in a half-lit world of candles and murmured voices. Most of the guests huddled in the main hall, playing cards or trading stories over wine. I found her near the fireplace, her sketchbook resting on her lap, a candle flickering beside her face. The firelight painted her skin in warm golds and shadows, softening the lines around her eyes, deepening the calm that always surrounded her. I hesitated before sitting down beside her. "Looks like the storm's not letting up tonight," I said quietly. She glanced toward the rain-blurred window and smiled. "Storms rarely do. They just wait until you stop fighting them." There was something in her tone, not sadness, exactly, but the weight of someone who's lived through her share of them. We sat there, listening to the wind howl through the shutters, and for a while, neither of us spoke. Eventually, she began to talk, softly at first, almost to herself. She told me about the years she used to teach painting in a small town, about her marriage that had started with promise and ended with silence. "You spend enough time being what someone else needs," she said, her voice low, "and you forget what your own voice sounds like." I didn't interrupt. I just listened. There was something sacred in the way she spoke, unguarded but never dramatic, like each word had been weighed before it left her lips. When she finally looked at me, her eyes shone in the candlelight, not with tears, but with that same steady honesty that made her impossible to look away from. When she finished, the fire had burned down to glowing embers. I felt a strange pull, not of pity, but of recognition. I told her that I understood more than she might think. How I'd always felt a step behind everyone my age, too serious, too unsure. How sometimes, even in a room full of people, I felt invisible. Her expression softened then, and for the first time, she looked at me as if she truly saw me, not as a younger man, not as a guest, but as someone quietly searching for something too. Outside, lightning flared across the sea, and the room filled with a pale, brief light. When it faded, she reached out, a small, instinctive gesture, and brushed back a damp strand of hair that had fallen over my forehead. Her fingers lingered there just a moment longer than necessary, warm against my skin. Neither of us spoke after that. The only sounds were the rain and the slow crackle of the fire. In that quiet, something unspoken settled between us, a fragile understanding, trembling and real, that neither of us dared to name. The morning after the storm felt different, quieter, heavier somehow, as if the air itself remembered what had happened the night before. The sun was out again, the sky washed clean and bright, but the energy between us had changed. At breakfast, Elena sat a few tables away, speaking softly with one of the instructors. She smiled politely, nodded at something he said, but I could tell her mind wasn't there. When she glanced up and saw me, it wasn't avoidance in her eyes, it was something more careful. A quiet question neither of us wanted to answer in public. I spent most of that day trying to draw, but every sketch turned into her face. Every brushstroke looked like her hand, her expression, her calm. Nothing I made looked right. I ended up walking the cliffs instead, hoping the wind might clear the fog in my head. I found her there near sunset, standing close to the edge where the path met the rocks. The light was golden, catching in her hair, and she looked both fragile and impossibly strong. I almost turned around, but she spoke before I could. "You remind me," she said softly, "of who I used to be before everything got complicated." Her words landed like both confession and warning. I stepped closer, careful, not wanting to break the fragile peace around her. "And who was that?" I asked. She smiled faintly, not at me, but at the horizon. Someone who believed feeling something deeply was always worth the risk. For a long time, we just stood there, watching waves crash against the rocks below. The silence wasn't comfortable anymore, it carried weight, something that pressed gently between us. I wanted to tell her what I'd been feeling, how her presence made everything sharper, how I caught myself waiting for her voice, her laugh, her calm, but I couldn't. I was afraid that saying it aloud would make it real, and real things have a way of breaking. When she turned toward me, her expression softened. "You're still young," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "You'll have people your age who understand you, who can walk beside you without all of this." I wanted to ask what this was. The tension? The closeness? The way my chest tightened every time she looked at me? But I didn't. Instead, I just nodded, pretending to understand. That night, the retreat held a small gathering on the terrace. Everyone laughed, music played softly, but I couldn't focus. Across the crowd, I saw her, standing under the glow of hanging lanterns, her wine glass reflecting the light. She was smiling, graceful as always, but there was distance in her eyes, a kind of restraint that broke something quietly inside me. When our eyes met, it lasted no more than a heartbeat. But in that single, electric second, we both knew we had already crossed a line we could no longer pretend wasn't there. The evening sky hung low and violet when I found her in the garden. The retreat was quiet, most of the guests had gone into town for dinner, leaving behind a calm emptiness broken only by the sound of crickets and the distant pulse of the sea. She was sitting on a stone bench beneath the old fig tree, her sketchbook open on her lap, its pages fluttering in the cool breeze. She didn't look surprised to see me. Maybe she'd been expecting it. Maybe we both had. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly, eyes still on the page. "I know," I replied, stepping closer. But I couldn't stay away. The air between us felt charged, like the moment before a confession. She set the sketchbook aside and looked up, her expression unreadable. "You'll forget me one day," she said. You should. There was no bitterness in her voice, just quiet certainty, as if she'd already made peace with being temporary. I shook my head. You know I won't. Her lips parted, as if she wanted to argue, but the words didn't come. Instead, she looked away, toward the distant horizon where the last of the sunlight touched the waves. The silence that followed was heavy, but not uncomfortable. It was filled with everything we hadn't said, every almost touch, every look that had lingered too long. When I finally reached out, I did it slowly, not wanting to startle her. My fingers brushed hers, hesitant at first. She didn't pull away. She turned her hand so that our palms met, and just like that, the world seemed to still. Her hand was warm, steady, her thumb tracing small, nervous circles against my skin. There was vulnerability in her touch, not the kind that asks to be pitied, but the kind that trusts someone enough to be seen. I don't want to be something you outgrow, she whispered. You're not, I said quietly. You're something I'll never stop remembering. She gave a small, almost broken laugh, the kind that sounds like it hurts a little to release. Then she leaned forward, resting her forehead lightly against my chest. I could feel her breath, slow and uneven, through the thin fabric of my shirt. Instinctively, my arms found their way around her, holding her as if she might vanish with the wind. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The scent of jasmine hung in the air, heavy and sweet. The garden lights flickered faintly, catching in her hair. I felt the soft tremor of her heartbeat against mine, and something in me knew this was both a beginning and an ending. When she finally pulled back, her eyes glistened in the half-light. Some memories, she said, aren't meant to fade. They're meant to live quietly in you, like songs you never stop humming. And standing there beneath the fading sky, I realized I wasn't afraid of remembering her. I was afraid of the day when remembering would have to be enough. The morning she left began like any other, pale sunlight, the smell of brewed coffee, the hum of waves breaking against the rocks. I didn't know it yet, but something in the air felt different, as if the sea itself was holding its breath. I walked down the corridor to find her, the one lined with salt-stained windows that looked toward the garden. Her door was open. Inside, the bed was neatly made, the curtains drawn back to let the light spill in. But she wasn't there. At first, I thought she'd gone for one of her early walks along the cliffs, the ones she said helped her listen to herself again. But when I looked around, I saw the suitcase missing, her shoes gone, the sketchbook left behind on the desk, its leather cover closed, the pencil still tucked inside. My stomach dropped. I stepped closer, hesitating before opening it. The pages were filled with sketches I'd seen before, waves, clouds, the outlines of distant figures. But near the end, there was one I hadn't seen. It was me. She had drawn me sitting by the fire, head tilted toward the light, a faint smile caught halfway between shyness and peace. The drawing wasn't perfect, it was gentle, almost uncertain, but it was real. On the very last page, she had started another sketch. It was of the sea again, though unfinished, a single pencil line trailing off the edge of the paper as if she'd stopped mid-thought. Tucked into that page was a folded note, faintly smudged where her fingers must have held it. It read, "Asterisk, don't try to forget this. Because you never will. Asterisk." For a long while, I just stood there, reading the words over and over. The paper trembled in my hands, though I wasn't sure if it was from the wind coming through the open window or from something inside me breaking quietly apart. Outside, the world carried on as if nothing had changed. The sea rolled in and out, the gulls cried overhead, and a few guests chatted on the terrace, laughing at nothing. But for me, everything had shifted. I took her sketchbook and walked down to the shore. The sand was cool beneath my feet, the horizon pale and endless. The tide reached up to touch the rocks, retreating with a hiss, as though whispering her name. I sat there for what felt like hours, the sketchbook open on my knees. I traced the pencil lines she'd left behind, trying to imagine her hand moving across the page one last time. There was no anger in me. Just a quiet ache, the kind that doesn't want to heal because healing would mean letting go. When I finally looked up, the sea shimmered beneath the rising sun. It was the same view we'd shared so many times, but now it felt different, not emptier, just heavier with meaning. She was gone. But somehow, I could still feel her there, in the salt air, in the sound of the waves, in the echo of her words that refused to fade. Months passed, and life returned to its usual rhythm, or at least, that's what I told myself. The city felt louder than I remembered, the lights too bright, the pace too fast. I threw myself into work, into people, into noise, anything that could drown out the quiet space she left behind. But some silences are too deep to fill. Every now and then, I'd catch it, a trace of jasmine in the air, a certain tone in someone's laugh, the way sunlight hit glass after rain, and just like that, I'd be back there, sitting beside her on the cliffs, the sea stretching endlessly ahead. It wasn't memory in the usual sense. It was more like she'd become part of my senses, woven into the small details of living. Her sketchbook sits on my windowsill now, its cover soft from the touch of my hands. I couldn't bring myself to keep it hidden. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, I open it and trace the lines she drew, the sea, the unfinished horizon, the faint outline of me. Each page feels alive, as if her thoughts were still whispering through the graphite. At first, I wanted to finish the last sketch she left incomplete. I thought maybe if I did, I could bring her some kind of closure, or maybe bring myself some. But every time I lifted a pencil, I stopped. It didn't feel right. She had always said, asterisk, not everything needs to be finished to be understood. Asterisk. So I began something different. I started painting small canvases of the sea, each one in a slightly different light, morning blue, storm gray, dusk gold. And in each, somewhere hidden, I added a small figure. Sometimes standing at the edge of the water, sometimes walking away, sometimes turning back. Always her. People at the studio would comment on them. "There's a calm sadness in your work," one said. I only smiled, because there wasn't sadness, not really. There was memory. One evening, as rain tapped softly against my window, I found myself whispering aloud, not to the room, but to her. "You were right, Elena. I never did forget." And I realized that was never the point. Forgetting wasn't what she wanted for me. She wanted me to remember, not in grief, but in gratitude. To carry the stillness she gave me into the chaos of life. Now, when I walk along the shore, I look for her reflection in the waves. Not because I expect to see her, but because the memory reminds me what it means to feel deeply, to let someone change the shape of your heart, even if only for a short while. She once said the sea remembers everything. Maybe that's why I keep returning to it, because it holds her the way memory holds me. And sometimes, when the light hits just right, I swear I can still hear her voice in the wind, soft, certain, eternal, saying, "Don't try to forget this. Because you never will."